Hey everyone. So, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the channel recently reached 1,000 subs, and I just wanted to thank all of you for being part of this journey with me. When I started this channel a year and a half ago, I didn't really know what to think. I figured that I could get some people to watch some of my videos, maybe like comment once in a while, but it's just crazy to be sitting here now seeing this community that has really come and supported a lot of my content, and none of this would have been possible without you. And I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been great getting to meet a lot of you, and as the channel continues, I hope to meet more of you in the future. And as a way of celebrating, I wanted to have a Q&A video. So I asked all of you to submit your questions, and today we're going to be answering a lot of those questions. So let's get right into that. Why did you name yourself Gumball? So Gumball goes way back to 2011 at least, where I was a big fan of The Amazing World of Gumball at the time. It was during its first season, and it was during that time that I got into fan fiction. It was the first show that I ever wrote fan fiction for, and it was for this site called Gumbapedia Fan on Wiki, which I'll leave a link for in the description. But basically, it was there that I just wrote stories about like Gumball basically. And it was during that time that I had to come up with a username, and since I was 13 and wasn't really creative at the time, I looked to the founder of the website, whose name was Gumball Fan 2, and I basically just dropped the fan and kept everything else to form Gumball 2. And that was basically my name from there on in. And funnily enough, I actually stopped watching the show after the start of season 2. I just sort of grew out of it. But the name stuck pretty much, and I used it for pretty much everything else, like including other fanfiction sites, and I used it for Discord and Reddit and pretty much any other website. It basically became my name, and it basically just stuck ever since. So that's the story behind that. Do you like Gabon? I would say so. It's definitely one of the weirdest seasons of the show where you have all this stuff happening, like GC being the leader and almost quitting the game. You have Sugar turning on Ace. You have the whole Marcus downfall. You have Sugar flipping against Maddie to save Bob. You have all this crazy stuff in there. And I know a lot of people talk about this cast as being super crazy and chaotic. And I think when I'm watching the season, I like it as it is. But I feel like in the grand scheme of things, like they're not the greatest players in the world, obviously. And I feel like even character wise, I feel like they're probably not the biggest characters in the world. Like I feel like when I think about my favorite Survivor characters, I don't really turn to Gabon very much. But then when I'm watching the season, like I can definitely get behind like Randy. I can get behind like even like Crystal and her stuff. I think Kenny's probably my favorite character simply because he's like all like a Smash player and stuff. Like I think that's pretty cool and not really something you would see much on something like Survivor. So I do like Gabon, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite seasons. Have you ever seen Superbad? Not really. Did you watch Survivor Quebec? I haven't had a chance to yet, but I am interested in it at least. I've heard some crazy stuff that's happened during it that I'm not going to get into in case anyone doesn't want to be spoiled. However, I'm really looking for a version that has subtitles. I feel like if I'm able to come across that I'd probably be pretty apt to watch it. But until then, I just don't see it as a super high priority. If you had to pick the player with the most potential of the new era of Survivor on a return, who would it be? I think there's a number of people that could do reasonably well if they were to come back. Just looking at 44, you have Helen and Sarah that I think could do pretty well. However, my pick is going to be Cody from 43. I feel like he's a type of player that can do well on pretty much any given season that he plays on. And while I thought he was too loyal to Jesse in 43, I actually think that could work to his benefit if he were to come back. I think people will really underestimate him, sort of see him as a bit of a goofy guy that isn't going to make big moves. I think that if he's able to correct that while still leaning into that perception, I think he could be a very dangerous player on the return. What do you like more as a game, Survivor or Big Brother? Likewise, which one of those two do you like more as a show? I think inherently Big Brother is a more interesting game than Survivor, where you have more ways that you can manipulate the game through winning HOH, throwing it, who decided to put up initially, who you want playing the veto, how you want the veto to be used, so on and so forth, and even down to the votes. While the votes are usually pretty consensus, there are a number of ways that you can use it, whether to hide your allegiance or you want to create the perception of a split house. I think through that, Big Brother is a more interesting game inherently than Survivor, but I think historically Survivor has created a better TV product where I feel like it's outclassed Big Brother in terms of casting, both from an entertainment and gameplay standpoint. I think they've done a better job with their twists in terms of thinking them through and not completely breaking the game, even though there's still plenty of questionable stuff Survivor's done. And I think through the format of it being pre-filmed and them being given more time to edit, I think it's led to a more compact story. I think it's led to a more intentional story. And I think it's a more entertaining thing to watch. Whereas I feel like with Big Brother, I feel like a lot of the episodes are kind of filler. And I think about it more in terms of what we get from the live feeds than anything else. So I think Survivor is probably the better TV show. What Big Brother player do you think would have the best chance on Survivor and vice versa? I kind of struggled on this one. However, I did narrow it down to two people. One of them being Dan Giesling, someone that is obviously pretty hyper strategic and someone that's not going to be too big of a physical threat in the end game. And while he could struggle early on with being seen as weak, I think he's someone that could definitely get through that and do pretty well in the more cutthroat nature of the game. And I also considered Tommy Bracco from BB21, someone that was pretty good socially and strategically and did a pretty good job of positioning himself well throughout the game. However, they kind of got screwed over by Jackson winning comp after comp, which caused his undoing by the end of it. Whereas I feel like that won't be as big of a factor on Survivor, so I'm tempted to say that he would do pretty well on Survivor. Over on the Survivor side, I think the obvious answer is Hayden Moss, but I'm sure you're looking for something a bit more creative. And I think to that end, my answer would probably be either Ken Spradlin or Jeremy Collins, as I feel like both of them are very good socially and very good at building good relationships with most of their cast. However, I think Kim's probably slightly better in terms of building relationships with everyone outside of her alliance, whereas I feel like Jeremy could be pigeonholed as being a bit of a leader for his alliance, but they're both still very solid socially. And I think the main thing that puts them above other great players is their physical ability, where I feel like both of them could win a lot of cons from their side, gain a lot of power and influence in the game to where they could be very successful. So I think to that end, I probably go with one of those two with a slight leaning towards Kim. Who in the new era Survivor do you think is the most underrated and overrated player? I think the comments that I got from my top 10 players of the new era video kind of gave me good answers for these, where I would say Cody is probably the answer for the underrated player. I feel like he's someone that a lot of people could sleep on any given season. I think people see him as this goofy guy that probably doesn't have a lot going on when I think he does. And while he's not perfect, I still think he could do very well on any season that he plays. And I feel like if he were to come back, he'd probably do very well. In terms of the most overrated New Era player, I'd probably say Marianne. And it's not even that I think people think that Marianne's the greatest of the New Era players. However, I've seen a lot of people say that she's like in the conversation of the top 5 simply because she won. And I still think she is a good player. I think she has a lot of strategic acumen. I mean, heck, I listened to her 5-hour deep dive and she clearly thinks a lot about the game, but I still think she's a very high variance player. I think she has a lot of potential to be targeted early on any season that she plays. And even if she were able to crack through, I think there's limited opportunities for her in order to make big moves and to get towards the end. And while I'm sure some people will say that that's just simply how the new era is played, that you can't be too out in front and that you have to wait until the end to make your big move, I don't think that's always going to be the case. I think it's more so the meta that we're in at this given time, where all it takes is one person to completely shift the meta. And I'm not sure whether Marianne could adjust to a sort of game where more dominant gameplay is rewarded. So I think Marianne needed a certain setting in order to win. I think she needed a certain cast. I think she needed certain people at the end to where she still loses at the end against Lindsay. And even against Mike, she needed a solid final trial performance, plus Mike having a bad one in order to truly win over the jury by the end. So it's not that I think Marianne's a terrible player, but I do think she's probably the most overrated. Why do you think the Big Brother community hates juries that do not vote for the quote-unquote best player? The jury in BB20 are labeled bitter by some, but votes for Casey, such as Sam, Fessy, Rockstar, were not Antitoler votes. Isn't it fair for the jury to vote for someone who they have more of a connection to or more respect for regardless of the gameplay? Of course it is. In fact, I go as far to say that the jury can vote for whoever they want for whatever reason that they want. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a social game and you're working with a group of people that can vote based on how they feel and who they are as people. I mean, and there's really nothing that we can do to stop that per se, other than just say what we would have done in that situation. I mean, personally, I think we should vote for whoever is the best player in any given season, or at least who's perceived by you with the information that you have to be the best player. And I do think having a connection with someone can lead into that, where if you have more of a connection with someone, you're more likely to see their actions as gameplay and see the person that you're not as close with as playing or making moves that don't make a ton of sense. So I think these 2 points you present are kind of interconnected in a way. But at the end of the day, I mean, the jury can vote for whoever they want for whatever reason they want. And we have every right in the world to disagree with it, but they also have the same right to make that decision based on how they feel and what they want. So I do agree with you in that sense. Do you plan to make a video about every survivor slash Big Brother jury's philosophy? Like, what was their thought process before and after the FTC? I haven't thought about that, but it would be an interesting idea. I don't think it would be necessarily like going through one season at a time. I think it would just be like talking about the various schools of thought per se, or at least talking about different categories and then saying which seasons fit into those categories as a way of being more concise. But it would definitely be an interesting idea. What is your philosophy in Survivor gameplay, or what exactly is your criteria when doing your rankings? As some of you are aware, and as I know some people have commented, I was inspired by the Marine Review. I'm someone that probably aligns a lot with them in terms of how they see the game. And basically what it boils down to is the social and strategic games are probably the most important aspects of both Survivor and Big Brother. And in a lot of ways, they are connected. You need relationships in order to gain information to make proper moves. And obviously, you need those relationships to execute any moves that you make. And in turn, you need to have solid strategy in order to maintain those relationships and get to the end with as many solid numbers as you can to better your odds of winning the game. I feel like the social and strategic games are probably the most reliable ways in terms of getting through the game and potentially winning in terms of gaining respect from the jury and in terms of communicating why you made the moves that you needed to make in order to get through the game. Now, I will admit that he's a bit too harsh on the physical side of things, where I do think there is at least some benefit to having a solid physical game. Not so much in the sense of winning the most challenges or getting to the end to say that you are the physical player, but more as a way of ensuring that certain people that you don't want to get to the end aren't able to win the competitions. Like winning competitions in a way that allows you to take out the people that you need to take out. I mean, I have personal experience from this. I played in orgs before where I've had 2 orgs now where I got screwed over by someone else going on an immunity run, getting to the end and presenting themselves as the big threat that I was not able to get out. And it's tough in that sense. So I think a lot of it will depend on how you're able to get through the game. But at the end of the day, I still think physical competitions are only necessary in certain situations. I feel like more often than not, you need a solid social and strategic game in order to get through the game. And it's probably the most consistent way of getting through it, regardless of who's on your cast and whatever twists get thrown your way. So I sort of feel like that's my main philosophy on the game. What is one staple from pre-New Era Survivor you would bring back? I think for me, the very big answer is trade swaps. I think we need to bring them back. I think as we stand right now, the pre-merge is very stagnant, where we basically have power structures that pretty much remain the same until the merge. And then the merge is where the season seems to start. It almost feels like the pre-merge is kind of irrelevant in the new era, pretty much. And I think it only increases the importance of original tribal lines. So I think bringing back each swap can really do a lot in terms of not only creating more interesting like votes in the pre-merge, particularly post-swap, but also make things more interesting in the post-merge by having more relationships. I think it was Christian that did a whole segment on RJP about how having swaps increases the number of relationships and number of possibilities in the game. And I think he's right. So I think I would probably go with the trade swap. However, if we're talking about smaller little things, I'd probably go with the rites of passage, which I know have been gone for a while now, but I think having that, it's just a nice little way of giving the season a bit of closure, sort of tying things back into things that happened earlier, like giving the earlier boots a chance to speak once again. I think that would be pretty nice for me, but I understand if we never get it back. From the early seasons, which non-winning forgotten player do you think were ahead of their time and would do much better if they played today? I think a very clear answer in terms of ahead of their time would probably be Kelly Goldsmith from Africa, someone that was very willing to flip against her original alliance up until she gets voted out due to the whole Lex stuff after the merge. So I would probably go with her. However, I will also admit that she's probably not the most forgotten in the world, even though she played very early in Survivor history. And I think a lot of that ties into her constantly being referred to as a second chance candidate. So I don't think she's necessarily forgotten. However, I think another interesting player is probably Tracy from Micronesia, given that she's someone that almost got Aussie blindsided in the pre-merge, which I think would have been a very interesting move there. However, it didn't quite go through. And even earlier on, you had her basically use Joel as a meat shield and got him to do all of her dirty work until she just dumped him immediately after the swap. So I think she's kind of been forgotten player nowadays, but someone that's still very solid. I don't have a question, but I want to say that I love your videos and really enjoy watching them. Keep up the great work. Thanks, HE, I really appreciate it. Have you ever considered applying for any of the shows you cover? I don't know what country you live in, but for the shows that exist in yours, have you applied to for any of them? I did submit an audition tape for Survivor in the past, however, it's just not a high priority for me. I feel like I'm not someone that would be particularly likely to be cast. I don't think I'm the most interesting television character in the world. And I think I would probably not do that well on Survivor, if I'm being honest. I'm pretty socially awkward as it is, so I probably wouldn't say it's a high priority, but it'd be pretty cool if I got the chance to. What is your least favorite Survivor season, and what is one Survivor castaway that some fans might think is overrated, but you think is underrated? In terms of least favorite season, I probably say Survivor Thailand. I feel like the cast is not great from a gameplay perspective, and even from a moral standpoint, there's definitely some not great things in that season. So I probably go with that. In terms of the player question, I think Mike White is someone that probably gets a bit too much hate, as he's someone that is seen as someone that just gave up at the end, and even after David versus Goliath is sort of looked down upon, given he is sort of blamed for a lot of the changes made to the new era, given that he talked to Jeff before it. However, I still think Mike is a very solid player. He's someone that played a very solid game, and I think through a lot of the stuff that's happened both before and after the show with him being a celebrity and everything, I think people tend to overlook him as a player per se. So I think to that end, I probably go with Mike White. Do you agree that Cook Islands is a bad season? I wouldn't say it's an entirely bad season. I think it has some pretty solid moments, such as the whole Billy stuff with Candace, you had the whole mutiny, and you have some good characters too, like Penner, Yule, and Ozzy. However, it's also a very inconsistent season where a lot of the pre-merge from the Billy Garcia episode until the mutiny is very boring, and a lot of the people voted out there are just kind of no-names. And even after the I-24 get the numbers after the merge, I think it's a bit of a slog as well, where we're seeing the railroads being picked off one after the other, and it's very clear that the I2s are just going to steamroll. But I still think it has some good moments here and there too, where I wouldn't say it's a terrible season, but it's not one that I would particularly want to rewatch very often. Just wanted to say I love Adventure Time and your Survivor videos. Thanks, I really appreciate it. And it's funny that my name originally came from watching The Amazing World of Gumball, but I think over time I sort of latched on to Adventure Time more, to where I think that sort of superseded the meaning of my name, but it did originate with Gumball. But still, I appreciate the comment. Most underrated winner? Well, I did make a whole video where I broke down my top 5 underrated winners, but the number 1 for that is Earl Cole, and I still stand by it. I think Earl Cole tends to get forgotten about a lot. He's kind of screwed over by the fact that he played on a season that people don't like very much, and also that he was working with a fan favorite in Yell Man. But I still think he's a very solid player and a very dominant winner at that, so I'd probably go with him still. Favorite winner? I think Tony's my favorite winner, both from a gameplay perspective and from an entertainment perspective. I mean, he's really funny and I can't stop watching him, but he's also a very innovative player, willing to make some very crazy moves along the way. However, I also really like Boston Rob for similar reasons. He's just a very funny character, but also a very solid player. And on Redemption Island, he was very fun to watch there, even though people don't like that season. But I probably go with those two, but Tony probably takes the cake for me. Why do you always talk about the eliminated person in a power ranking? I think from a logical perspective, it sort of makes sense, as I did talk about that person in the previous power ranking as having a non-zero chance of winning the game. However, now they have a 0 chance of winning the game. So I feel like I need to account for that when talking about it. But from a more practical sense, I think I really enjoy it. I think it gives me a chance to give that person a send-off. It lets me talk about my personal thoughts on them as a character and a player. And I think it's just a good thing to talk about. I think it's just something that I kind of come to enjoy. So I guess that's why I talk about that person, even though they're no longer in the game. Who is your favorite Survivor YouTuber? Congrats on 1K. Thanks, Bandit. And I really do enjoy watching your content. But outside from that, I do watch a lot of the other main Survivor YouTubers as well. I mean, I've already talked about the Iranian review. He was a very big influence for me when I was first getting my start. But I do also watch Peridium, Idled Out, even Once Upon an Island from time to time. And there's actually a smaller YouTuber that I watch as well. Their name is Beans. They're a very small YouTuber, only 300 subs, but I really enjoy a lot of their content. They talk about similar shows that I do, including Total Drama. And I also kind of enjoy Survivor Zealots as well. They're a podcast that they started during 44, but they're still growing, and I really like their channel as well. And I'll leave a link to their channels in the description. What individual winner's edit would you have liked to be edited differently? Whether it was more content for them or stronger positive, negative, CP, OTT tone. I think the weird thing for me is that I kind of enjoy every winner's edit for different reasons, and I think it's hard for me to imagine how the season would play out without them. Where I feel like even the ones that I have issues with, such as Natalie's and Gabler's, have their charm to them in the sense that they were either unpredictable or they're kind of subtle to where it's sort of fun to pick it out in the rewatch. But I think at the end of the day, I probably would say that Natalie and Gabler's edits are probably ones that I would probably prop up a bit more. I mean, Natalie especially so, given that she literally only had, 14 confessionals during her season. So I feel like we could have definitely benefited from her getting more content, really showing why she won as opposed to simply why Russell lost. But I still think there are plenty of enjoyable aspects to each winner in terms of how the story is told too, where I probably wouldn't change that much. And the final question we have is, what made you create a Survivor YouTube channel? Well, it was really during the break between 40 and 41 that I really started to see more of the Survivor YouTube community. And it's sort of a weird spot given that I did take a bit of a break from Survivor during my time in college, which was between Millennials versus Gen X and Island of the Idols. But I still had a connection to the show where Nicaragua was the first season that I saw live, and I saw every season live from there until Co Wrong. And I did watch a lot of the old seasons like backwards on DVD, but obviously I did take that break. Where Winners at War was really what got me back into the show, and it's during that year and a half after that season where I really got immersed into the Survivor fandom, where I really got caught up, and I felt like my fandom just really escalated to where by the time 41 rolled around, I feel like that's what motivated me to finally work up the courage to start talking about it online. And I've enjoyed it. I feel like I've really gotten to appreciate the show on a far deeper level than I had before. And plus, I got to meet so many wonderful people along the way. And that's really what my journey has been about up to this point. But obviously, you guys are all involved in there. So I really do have to thank all of you for getting me to this point. And hopefully in the years to come, we can continue to build a wonderful community and talk about these shows that we enjoy so much. So that'll do it for this Q&A. If you didn't have a chance to ask any questions, feel free to leave some in the comments, as I still am opening to answering questions. And I might do this again in the future, as I really enjoyed answering these questions. But that'll do it for this video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back with more content very soon, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's a video. See ya.